you guys enjoy that last player profile, the kind of boomer bust nature of a guy like Pat Freiermuth, because we're continuing that narrative, switching over from the Steelers to the Patriots, from the tight end position to the running back position, where you have a guy who's going to be entrusted with a lot of the workload as the Patriots try to find some success, some iota of success at the offensive side of the ball in terms of how they play. Without further ado, let's jump right into the fantasy player profile of Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, Rhamondre Stevenson actually embodies boomer bust, because coming into the league, he looked like he was going to be a superstar, but last year, fate of circumstance led to him not having as good a year as people thought he was going to do. But it certainly looks like he's going to get a lot of touches in a Patriots offense that really has no source of optimism, kind of unlike the Steelers, who at least have George Pickens and can say they have a top-end receiver. The Patriots just have a conglomeration of role players. So without further ado, let's jump right into why Rhamondre Stevenson is primed for a big season, or it could all fade into obscurity. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 388.7 fantasy points. His best season was in 2022 with 180.1 fantasy points. So as you can see, fantastic start to his career. He was the running back 10 in 2022, 186 yards per game last year. As we all know, kind of got caught up in the rapture of this very inept Patriots offense. Running back 27 last year, only 71.4 yards per game. However, if there was any upside to what the last season could tell us about how he's going to transition to this season, when he could be even a bigger role. In weeks 1 through 8, he was 33rd in missed tackles out of 34 running backs, and 38th in yards after contact. From weeks 9 to 13, he only played in 13 games. Injury concerns is another one of those things as to why he might not have a breakout season again. 13th in missed tackles, 3rd in yards after contact. And so, I'm really intrigued to see whether or not Rhamondre Stevenson will be relied upon a lot more than people think. Because, in terms of fantasy projections, he's only projected to have 783 yards for 5 touchdowns, 144.1 fantasy points. So, not terrible, but not necessarily the standard you want at the QB position. The running back position. In terms of the QB position, and Drake May and how he transitions to the NFL, that's going to be a very important factor, because Drake May, in terms of player profile, could be one of those more jittery rookie QBs who doesn't really settle into the system right away. A lot of skepticism surrounding him stems from, his footwork, his accuracy, what he can do outside of structure, and so I really think he's going to lean on Rhamondre Stevenson a lot. And looking at this wide receiver core, there isn't much to talk about. It's kind of like a what-if scenario. What if, they had gotten Deebo Samuel in 2019 instead of N'Keal Harry? What if they had gotten George Pickens instead of Tyquan Thornton in 2022? And now they're left with all these different role players with no true identity to what they can do or what they represent. And so you're stuck with guys like the Mario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Juju Smith-Schuster, who was disappointed. His snaps were reeked with injuries. And right now, the only productive players who I can think about on this Patriots roster are Rhamondre Stevenson and Hunter Henry, who are both coming off very disappointing years. And right now, there is no sense that any source of excitement stems from this Patriots offense. There's no one that eye-catching right now that can help supplement Drake May outside of Rhamondre Stevenson. Yes, you have Jalen Polk, who could be an interesting prospect to develop. Very underrated player, kind of overshadowed in that wide receiver room at the University of Washington. But there are also reasons as to why he doesn't necessarily strike you immediately. He only went a 4.5 plus 40. And then you have a guy in Javon Baker who was a 4th rounder, who's also kind of in that same profile. So, just reading all these names, there's no one I can pinpoint and say, ooh, Drake May should be excited by that player. And right now, I'm going to keep on sounding repetitive. Rhamondre Stevenson is the most appealing name. Now, they did bring in Antonio Gibson to kind of help bolster that backfield. He is a nice addition from the Washington Commanders. Never truly a running back one kind of player in that Washington Commanders system. Definitely developed into more of a supplemental role in his career. And so adding him really doesn't threaten the hierarchy that I see in that running back room. So for all intents and purposes, Rhamondre Stevenson is going to be the workhorse. And for better or worse, that's perhaps what he needs to get back to what he was before, all these injuries happened and all these Patriots players ended up not working out. I really think that by being a focal point of the offense, Rhamondre Stevenson can be like, hey, they value me, so I'm going to do the best I can to help this young offense who right now looks very directionless, exceed expectations. And that has to stand for something. Because when you're in two offenses, like I mentioned with Pat Freiermuth and the Steelers and Patriots, who have very little in terms of escape routes and get out of jail free cards on their offense, so to speak, you need a guy who's going to step up and say, hey, this team is struggling. We have a guy coming in at the quarterback position who's not as polished as some other rookies, not as polished definitely as some of these veterans who are going to be facing in the AFC East. I need to be the focal point. I need to help my guy establish himself in the league. In order to do that, I need to step up. And that could be Rhamondre Stevenson. And I think he's very willing as well. He's not a guy who, in my mind at the very least, strikes me as an explosive guy after contact, which is why those missed tackles and yards after contact numbers are very promising, because he definitely is a more bell cow type of running back and not someone you would expect to go off for 30 or 40 yards in certain situations. So the balance of how Rhamondre Stevenson's season is going to go is very reminiscent of Pat Freiermuth. And I'm really excited that I get to break down two players who are not as high profile as some of the others I discussed, because these are two guys on middling teams, middling offenses, who have to become the escape routes. And it's up to them and how these offenses set up around new quarterbacks, Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh and Drake May in New England, very different players as well, to get the most out of what these offenses has to offer. And thus, Rhamondre Stevenson and Pat Freiermuth, in terms of their dichotomy, really represent an intriguing fantasy market. You go with two guys who I'm talking to you about now, who right now fit the mold of potential breakout players because of the circumstances of their offenses? Or do you stick with the status quo? The fact that I'm presenting these two guys to you proves that I think they have longevity, but it remains to be seen. But that will just about do it for this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you like the show. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network itself. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. We'll be back better than ever tomorrow on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast with another fantastic show. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in.